Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Sending a warm welcome to here with us. Today we'll be joined by our guest speaker, Professor Jeremy Kerr from QUT, to discuss technology and methods in co-design. I'm Nadia, the Research and Data Officer at QCOS, the Queensland Council of Social Service. I work in the Research and Policy team, and along with our Senior Data Analyst Amy Dellett, we facilitate the Research and Evaluation Network. QCOS is the peak body for community services in Queensland, and our vision is to achieve equality, opportunity and well-being for every person in every community across Queensland. QCOS acknowledges the historical injustice of colonisation and dispossession on First Nations peoples and its ongoing impact and legacies. We are committed to reconciliation, self-determination and opportunity for First Nations peoples as integral steps in achieving equality, opportunity and well-being for all Queenslanders. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the oldest continuing cultures, diverse languages and knowledge holders in human history. I am joining you from Meanjin, Brisbane, and I respectfully acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people and all First Nations colleagues and friends online in the webinar today. For those online in the meeting, please feel free to join us in acknowledging country where you are today through the chat function. The agenda for today's session will be the presentation by our guest speaker, followed by time for a Q&A. And the second half of the webinar, we're going to revisit the purpose of the network, share webinar feedback we've received throughout the year, and the end of year survey results. At the end, if we have time and anyone would like to share personal reflections or any highlights or challenges from the year, I'd love to welcome you to do so. And a couple of things to note before we start. By default, you will be on mute, but your camera will be turned on. The session will be recorded. If during the session you'd like to ask a question, you can write the question in the chat function. If we run out of time, we can follow up with you individually after the session. Just ensure your question or comment is in the chat. As a network, these discussions can obviously can often have a focus on sensitive and confronting topics, particularly with conversations around lived experience. Many people online work in complex systems with people navigating systems and supporting people who have experienced or are experiencing trauma. We acknowledge the tireless efforts of the community service sector that work towards prevention, early intervention, crisis response and recovery. The presentation components of this session will be recorded, so if you need to step away, you're more than welcome to come back and watch this session at a later time. If you do find yourself in need of support, please reach out to your EAP, supervisor, or a support service such as the ones we've shared in the chat. I'd like to now welcome our guest speaker for today's webinar, Associate Professor Jeremy Kerr from the School of Design at QUT. His work focuses on applying co-design methodologies to foster collaboration and to include the authentic voice and creative input of stakeholders in solutions. He has worked extensively with community and government organisations, education providers and health services to develop and apply co-design frameworks and approaches. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, and I'll just share my screen. Just give me 1 second. We'll get us in. And I'd just like to thank QCOS for inviting me to give this presentation. I completely love everything that they do and all the organisations that they're collaborating with, and it's inspiring to see such an amazing network in Queensland, just working in so many areas that are so valuable to so many people with different experiences. And I guess with this presentation, I'm going to sort of take you through a lot of the projects that I've been involved in, and I'm very much as a researcher methods-based. So I come from the Visual Communication Department at the School of Design. You'll learn a bit more in some of the slides in a second about me, but I'm very interested in using methods that are about connecting to some of the most hard to reach people. And I kind of work from a very healing centered and trauma informed perspective. And again, I'll talk a little bit about my lived experience in a bit. But I guess I've had the luxury of exploring all the potential of co-design in terms of all the different methods we can use. And I know a lot of people at this presentation, you're doing this amazing work in co-design, but you're juggling so much when you're working on a lot of projects. and you don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the cognitive load to go and explore new methods and so forth. So that's why a lot of the work I do is kind of just highlighting, I guess, other opportunities of co-design. We sometimes have our favorite methods and we keep using them again and again, and they're really fantastic, but there's a whole lot of different opportunities in the way that we co-design. So that's really a lot of the work that I do is promoting that and exploring that. And so this presentation is really about some of that work. I've put together a group of slides. There's a lot of them because I've done a lot of different things. So it's very much about going through them with you, highlighting some of the stuff that I've done, but I'm very much happy to share these slides with everyone for people to sort of see things that they're interested in. And I've got my email at the end. So feel free to contact me and we could have an informal chat about some of your work. I'm often giving advice to people on different approaches. I've been doing a lot of work with advisory groups, so community-led advisory groups at the moment, which has been so inspiring to be involved with. So happy to have a chat at any time. What you see here is a whole lot of AI images that I use because I love images. I like visual-led co-design because I think that sometimes we create barriers when we're engaging people because it involves writing, it involves sometimes talking, and a lot of people have gone through trauma. They've had negative educational experiences. So we try to move our interactions and our collaborations in new ways that don't necessarily feel like we're in educational institutions or don't require a certain grammar and so forth. So a lot of my stuff is very visual-led, and I've just gone down the wormhole of AI. And it was interesting, before we came on, I saw that little comment about the AI bots that could be in here. And recording things. And I think that I'd like to acknowledge that as much as I'm exploring AI, I'm aware of all the challenges, even culturally, the stuff that I'm depicting here with an Indigenous young child is contentious and is a thing that has to be heavily curated when you're working with AI. But I'm finding that this is a really nice way to collaborate with kids who, many of the kids that I collaborate at the moment don't know how to hold a pencil, don't know how to draw, but they want to create stories about the services that they want to be involved with. So this is some screenshots from a project where I got young kids to choose a visual style like Pixar, watercolor, anime, computer art, and go and create characters and explore what a service design could be for them. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but it's an example of me really going out and seeing what's happening with technology at the moment and exploring new options. And it's a really wonderful experience working with kids with AI image generation because they're learning. And so much of my foundation of my co-design work is capacity building for all the participants. So everyone that's in that co-design workshop, as they come out feeling inspired with greater skills, and feeling a bit more in control of their life, having given something of value in that collaboration. So I actually come from a foundation of post-traumatic growth or just this idea of growing through the co-design experience for participants as well as for the researchers. So that's why I really think about sort of methods that I'm using so they can teach people new skills, they can be novel and fun, and just make it a really positive experience for the people to be involved, even if the lived experience they're drawing on has had, significant challenges. So I guess just with exploring this craziness of technology at the moment, I did a little Google of myself rather than write a bio, but there was a really good bio before I started. But interesting, I'm not Jeremy W. Kerr, the actor, apparently. There's a Jeremy Kerr that's an actor. But there's a lot of stuff online about my work. So if there's anything in particular that you're interested in, feel free to do a Google and then touch base with me. I guess in terms of my career, the really important thing, which sometimes doesn't get talked about, is the fact that I've come later in life to academia, in that I've really worked as a designer for most of my life, as a creative director and a senior designer. That's been wonderful because I've worked in creative direction, I've worked in music videos, I've worked in the music industry in a bigger whole as an art director. Really, really exciting career, but it gets to a point where you're helping people in these really creative outlets, but sometimes you just want to help society on a better, a more sort of targeted way where we're, as a designer, you don't get the opportunities to really change lives necessarily. And so when I started to become a design lecturer and I discovered co-design, it just changed my whole world because I realized my design skill set was not about coming up with the solutions, but it was facilitating processes to help people tap into that expertise that they have. and transforming the systems and services that are supporting them and people like them. And it's allowed me to jump into a whole lot of different areas that you can sort of see. Some of my initial work was in India. I've worked with Education Queensland as well as educators throughout Australia. I think what's really interesting is with some of these images, very tactile, very old school. I'm someone who loves to write on post-it notes and so forth. So it's interesting that I'm taking myself out of a comfort zone by embracing the potential of technology. And I guess I just encourage you to do that if you're a little bit excited by some of the ideas that I talk about. So there could be some of the people that I've worked with. I think I saw a list of some of the people who are here today. So if you're someone that I've worked with, I'm really glad that you're here and you're listening to my work. Hopefully you're acknowledged. I've tried to acknowledge some of the key team members when I talk about all my projects, when you see the slides. Because I'm methods-based, it's allowed me to kind of jump around a whole lot of different areas, challenging areas. So it's almost like my naivety is a superpower, because I go into these areas like eating disorders, looking at setting up an international games for people with cognitive disability, working in the area of children's nutrition. All of these areas I ask the dumb questions. I look at supporting the people in it, and it's allowed me to kind of move. Whereas a lot of people, I think, in this webinar are probably experts in their field. I'm kind of like jumping into a lot of your fields, facilitating and I guess capacity building with co-design, supporting the projects that are really important for you. And I feel like an advantage is sometimes that fact that I have to get my head around things and understand the complexity of some of the challenges for organisations like the ones that you're coming from, has allowed me to then, when I engage some of the participants, I'm able to put things in simple terms and engage them about the real, key aspects when we do workshops and so forth. So it's a really unique and privileged position that I don't take lightly, the fact that I've been able to work in all these different projects. And one of the most amazing things is I had a project where I was actually asked to put together a resource for people on co-design. So a whole group of health researchers from a particular research centre, the Woolworths Centre for Childhood Nutrition Research. I was mentoring a lot of these health researchers in co-design methods as they wanted to incorporate co-design into a lot of the work they were doing. And then I actually had my own separate project, which then engaged a lot of people throughout Brisbane in all different sectors about how they wanted to learn co-design. And this ended up in this book, Art of Co-Design. And it was co-written. There's a group of us that are a team that wrote it, but it's principally myself and Jess Cheers. And we got to design it as well as write it. And it was the most fun experience. It was done very quickly, but it allowed us to really try to simplify this co-design process and demystify it, because it is a really confusing process. There's no specific definition. There's a QR code if you wanted to have a look at it online. It's through BIS Publishers. They're only publishing print versions and they're overseas. But what's been fantastic is this book has ended up having quite a far reach. So I've been working overseas with a lot of groups doing capacity building, like in Taiwan recently. But it's really allowed me to just, I guess, try to simplify the process so that it's really straightforward and really practical. And I guess that's coming back from my design background, where I'm not an academic per se. I've come from the design field. I just want things to be simple and easy to do. And that's why I put the book together with Jess in the format it is. And we actually do touch on a lot of these tech sort of foundations that we can use for co-design. Like we're in Teams today. We've got the complexity of blended workshops, where it might be that we want to do some in-person as well as online participation. There's certain challenges to that, but there's so many opportunities with it as well. There's all sorts of interesting asynchronous co-design that's emerging now, where we can use digital platforms to have people go on message boards and post messages to each other, but in their own time. So the book wanted to capture a lot of the different approaches we can use with technology. It was written post-COVID, so obviously the digital literacy went through the roof then. So the whole foundation, we have this really great workshop model where we really connect with people, and I wouldn't go past the idea of tactile design in a workshop setting where people can really connect on a really personal level. That's my go-to place, but there's all these other opportunities to do co-design. So we sort of tapped into it with the book, But what we've since had happen is the whole AI revolution. So there's a whole lot of new methods coming. And so my focus this year has been very much exploring what's next and hopefully putting together another publication that's going to cover some of the future direction. So this is kind of taking people through the book, through the journey of co-design. I think what's really important, when I did a lot of co-design for the book, a lot of people understand a lot of the methods, they love the methods, but they feel like there's such mystique around how you actually analyze methods. How do you credibly come up with your solutions and work with that data other than just feel like you're doing sense making or working on, intuition? So that was a large chunk of this book as well. So as much as it kind of talks about methods, it's kind of looking at co-design holistically. And I know that everyone that's here at this webinar is very aware probably of all these different terms here and the benefits of co-design. So I won't kind of go into that any further, but at the heart of this book is really this, the amount of methods that we get to play with. And we wanted it to I guess, celebrate the playfulness of co-design, even though sometimes we're working in challenging areas. There should be no reason that there's not this amazing creative energy and this optimistic, excitement that occurs in the room when people are co-designing together. So we wanted to represent that visually. And a lot of these methods, that's what makes them so great. They're not making people feel stressed about trying to solve problems. They're giving them exciting prompts, and they're a really playful way to get them to explore ideas. And there's a lot of them, but it's worth flipping through all the different methods that are out there and seeing which ones you like. Are you someone who loves sort of tactile stuff, like crafty stuff? I know that Jess, who I co-wrote with, loves that, whereas I love the really visual methods. Other people like the more sort of thinking ones that are very reflective. I think it's really important to look beyond the methods that you tend to like when you're working with different people. And part of my approach is to use multiple methods in workshops, because some methods will work better with certain people in space than others. So I always go with a multimodal approach, and I always give people different options of how they work with a method in terms of responding to it. So in terms of my methodology, it's a very visual-led, multimodal and inclusive. And really what we wanted to do is have a bit of a database of potential methods, so someone can flip through when they've got a new project and just go, oh, that's cool. That sounds like it could work. Let me explore that. So that was the idea behind it. And part of my philosophy is that everyone is creative. Everyone's an expert of their lived experience. We just have to untap and take the pressure off people of solving very complex issues. And that's where these really cool methods get us to have fun. Now, I guess what's interesting, a lot of the stuff I do is persona-based as a way to give advocacy to people who are coming from the more hard-to-reach positions or from the more based backgrounds. And that's actually, I think, what's really important to acknowledge is I am a researcher, I'm a design lecturer, but I actually have complex PTSD. I have had experienced homelessness as a child. I've gone through the whole thing. That's why I appreciate all the work QCOS does. But it's allowed me to kind of have that perspective of what it is to be a participant in some of these workshops, why some methods give me agency, why some methods will empower me and give me a voice, and how it gives me a voice. And I guess, it really comes down to this idea that I think with a co-design workshop, don't underestimate that it's an opportunity for post-traumatic growth. And I know that I see it in a lot of the work that I do with marginalised groups. And that's why it's really important to think about the sort of methods you do. So I guess going on to technology, the book has some, really straightforward ones that sometimes we can be we just need a green light to say, hey, this is a credible method. It almost sounds like too much fun. It almost sounds too obvious, but this is credible co-design. It doesn't have to be sitting here doing a journey map. It doesn't have to be, a certain format. And a really important concept behind this book was, with every method that we showed, like that spread that you saw, we have a page which talks sort of in really broad terms about the concept behind a method. It shows that you can use it in different ways, in the ways that you adjust and design a method, and that there's a lot of similar methods. And we also show that there's variations of the method. And I think that's really empowering for people, because sometimes when we read all this material on co-design and methods, It's almost like we've got a recipe and we get self-conscious that we've got it wrong, and we almost make things too hard for ourselves. We create barriers with the people that we're working with because we don't customize the methods for them, and we don't make it more fun or more engaging or more informal. So part of how we approach methods in this book was the concept, a broad concept for a method, and then showed how you can invent your own methods based on that broader concept. So with some of these, they're established subsets of methods, and in other cases, we invented methods that we've used. And I would just encourage you that this is where you get to be super creative if you have the brain load to deal with it. Again, I understand the challenges of working in the environments that you're working in, but there's absolutely, this is the beauty of co-design, is that you can design your own methods. It's the freedom and the creativity of working in this field. So don't hold yourself back and think that you have to do this, do that. There's so much possibility and potential in the sort of methods that we do. So it might be that you see something that I suggest in this presentation, then you do your own flip, your own remix of it, and you take it in a whole different direction. And that's awesome. That's what sharing co-design methods is all about. I just am going to touch on a couple of projects to sort of show, I guess, the diversity of different approaches that you can use that I've found kind of pretty fun and successful. I did a multi-year project with Autism CRC. So there's a national platform for teachers to implement inclusive learning in classrooms and beyond classrooms for kids that are not neurotypical and have multiple neurodiversities. What was really interesting out of the co-design is that the teachers actually realised that, hey, this wasn't just research and beneficial of people with autism. They said this can help so many people in the classroom, some of these practices that have come out of the research of the Autism CRC. So the co-design got us to actually create something that was a platform for a much broader group than it was going to be at the very beginning. It was going to be a platform to support people with autism. So this is a really good example where co-design redefined exactly what a project was. But some of the uses of technology that was really fantastic with this sort of project, which is maybe quite established now, but just a reminder that they're great things to do. If you're working with a group that maybe are a bit uncertain or not so confident in engaging new people, you can make really fun YouTube videos to introduce yourself to them and the project before they even meet you. And you can, destroy that whole image of what an academic or a researcher should look like by just being playful and fun and being excited to collaborate with them and set the tone before you even meet the people. We did a whole lot of YouTube team intros, which had really bad dancing in it. We also did a lot of online collaboration before COVID, we started this, and this allowed us to have this national reach. So when it comes down to it, as much as, we love an in-person workshop, we don't have the budgets to fly all over the place. So we want to take as much as we can from that amazing experience when we're in a room together and that dynamic into online context. And I'll show you something I'm experimenting with in a little bit. A thing that I find really successful is when I've got a concept, even if it's service design, I love creating proof of concept videos. They don't have to be really polished. They could just be a PowerPoint that's been made into a video, and you send to people to get asynchronous feedback as a way to engage everyone who's part of the co-design, even if they're not able to be in parts of follow-up. So simple uses of technology like that. Sometimes we go, oh, no, the video has to be slick. People don't want slick, they want authentic. So I find things like proof of concept videos, YouTube intro videos, all of that sort of stuff is a great way to engage people. Obviously, if you're doing a platform like we did with Inclusion Ed, we kind of went for a bit of slickness with the final product. But in terms of the sort of uses of technology in the design process, it doesn't have to be the same level of slickness. I'm just going to talk about a couple of other projects that I've done. So Dacumen Youth Hub, I was involved, and all my slides reference people that I work heavily with. So this is not just Jeremy doing this. Obviously, I've got other people on my teams, and I've got these amazing people that I'm co-designing with. So with the Dacumen Youth Hub, what was really interesting, as much we kind of, it's a good example of sometimes you use technology, sometimes you don't. We had a whole lot of cards of what a space should look like for this community hub that was for kids in Dacumen who'd had some challenges. So the idea was to create a third space, not the home, not the school, but somewhere that they could be protected and supported. In terms of designing it, so it was specifically designed for them, we used a co-design process, and we went and got hundreds and hundreds of spatial design features and fit outs and different types of environments. And we made these cards, we laminated them, threw them over tables. And when the kids walked into the room, they would just gravitate towards certain cards, and we'd get them to talk about why they liked that particular one. So it was almost like an icebreaker, but a really crucial co-design conversation starter for our work. And what was interesting is the tactility of those cards really works. So sometimes it's about physical artifacts, not just using technology. But what was interesting is we then did the same process with teachers and different services that were going to be involved with the hub. We used the same images, but we had them on Padlets, and they were all online together, and they were voting and creating a bit of ranking of images on Padlet together. So the same concept, but it was done virtually. So there's a really great, anything that you think that you love that happens in person in a workshop, that's where it's worth researching the technology to see if you can replicate it if you can't get everyone in the room together. And that's a really good example with that project. I also worked on an eating disorders project where we created a podcast that's kind of been used in training throughout Queensland, and it got distributed. It got picked up and distributed by News Limited throughout Australia, which was pretty amazing. What was interesting, we used personas as a way of protecting people when they tapped into their lived experience. And again, it was very much like based on the actual, more tactile sort of interactions. Even though we were creating a digital outcome, it was very much, again, going to, writing and drawing. But the interesting thing is, if I was to do the project now, I'd probably use AI. So there's a bit of a segue where my methods are changing as technology is changing. I think the really important thing is, as it says up here, is make your methods decisions case by case and look at the current situation, the current opportunities of technology. This is a project I did in India because we were doing cultural co-design. It was really inappropriate, even though we were doing a lot of outcomes that were technology-based to connect people in this containment area in India with other areas throughout India to support each other. A lot of what we did was cultural, having feasts together. We had a co-design session that went for 8 hours where we just celebrated and danced. And then we did a lot of tactile activities again, because that's what people felt familiar with. What's interesting is the digital literacy of some of these kids are getting quite sophisticated now. So if I was to go back to India, I might actually recheck the sort of methods that I'd use. So just really quickly, because I know I'm chewing up the time, this is an example of the Love of Learning program work that I've been doing with a group of researchers, where we got to use AI, where we basically, the idea is that we engage young kids in foster care to look at making that foster care mentorship program even better than it was already. And we used AI to create storybooks. So we tapped into what sort of visual styles they liked. We got them to create a younger persona. So again, they don't have to divulge everything about their lived experience. They actually feel quite protective of the next people to go through and really want to create something, that's even better for them. And we started to play with this idea of narratives. So creating stories about future services and systems. There's a lot you can do with AI. It can go horribly wrong. You can create the ugliest images in the world, but I've been playing around with it. Somehow I was able to curate comic strips with about 8 different participants in different visual styles with continuity of characters, which took a lot of practice. So it's not necessarily as easy as it looks, but there's some really wonderful opportunities because we were printing out posters for the kids. They were loving creating characters in the styles that they loved. And it was a joyful co-design experience. And it was a situation where we had some people, because of their broken schooling, that just were really reluctant to write or even draw. So for me, it showed that this method is really, really powerful. And I guess connected to AI, this is a big thing that's moving at the moment, this idea of using as a provocation. So obviously I've kind of sat on my computer and I'm trying to explore global warming and what it's going to look like for Gold Coast and Brisbane. It is what it is, but it's a conversation starter. So again, there's potential for AI, especially with speculative design, using prototypes, we call them, rather than prototypes, they're provocative, prototypes that we sometimes use to generate discussion. And so that's really, I guess, what I'm sort of talking about there is this idea that things that we would have done with collage, or young adults don't even look at magazines now. They don't necessarily know how to collage. If you do collage in a co-design workshop, it could be the first time they've ever done it in their life. So it's that idea that a lot of these methods are transforming, but fundamentally they're the same methods as before. And then the other thing I just wanted to chat to you about was this idea of I've kind of talking about how much I love in-person workshops. And it's because of the connection. It's such an immersive experience. And I've just looked up and I've got someone on my roof. So if I'm a little distracted, I think our windows are being cleaned. So sorry about that. So this is a project I've been doing with Holland University of Applied Sciences. I've been doing it across, I teach a unit called Design for Health Innovation and Kinetic Image and Text, which has VR in it. And we've been looking at, obviously we do a lot of online co-design on Zoom and Teams, but what if we could bring that really rich experience of being in an in-person workshop virtually, connect with people across the world in a way? Is that going to be a better experience than doing it on Zoom? And the findings of this research is that it definitely is. There's a real connection. There's a creative spark that happens when you do it in person. Obviously, there's so many barriers to doing this at the moment. Technology literacy, the costs of everything, the awkwardness, there's health and safety issues with it as well. But what we're doing is this work within a university sector to explore how we might go about co-designing with people in the future when everyone has access to this technology, and just exploring if it's going to be, a better way of doing things. And, obviously we can create immersive three-dimensional buildings for new services and have people interact with it and experience it and redesign it in real time. So the opportunities are really, really huge. So it's been a really exciting sort of thing that I've been doing. So this is from a presentation that we did overseas. There's a QR code that takes you to some information from in Holland. I've been so blessed to be working with Winner, who is a writer of a couple of different co-design books and methods books as well. So we've been having the best fun. I met her in real life when I went over to see my publisher, and we really connected, and then we decided to do this project. And the really amazing thing is, when I'm in a VR space with her and interacting with her, it's so different to being on Zoom with her, and I actually feel really connected. And that's really what we're exploring with this sort of work. So just really quickly, I'll just sort of show you what we're doing. The interface is really naive, but it's the idea. So this was a project with the municipality of The Hague. So that it was real life briefs with kids that are in the Netherlands and students that are BUT, and we're all meeting in different co-design rooms. And you can sort of see me at the top. What you're seeing is what somebody in the room is seeing, but what you're also seeing are what the students are doing. So it doesn't look like they're really interacting, but they're actually having quite amazing interactions within that room. What's interesting, we chose this particular platform because we were using Post-its. We were creating Post-its by talking and then throwing them at boards. Those boards we could download as Miro boards. So there was a software that could connect to the way that we're used to having data. We were able to embed videos within the space as well. So just move to the next bit. But that was why we chose that particular software, even though it's not as immersive as it could be in terms of being super realistic. It actually allowed for some of the methods to translate, but we explored personas and avatars. And what was really interesting is there was experiences where we basically I was able to change the time of day from at the end of the day to the morning when the sun came up, and everyone felt more creative. It was just this amazing transformational thing. So in terms of creating creative energy, there's a lot of potential there. And really exciting. So we're putting together a bit of a framework as to how you might do this. There definitely needs to be an onboarding process. But there's so much in terms of embedded interaction and knowledge that comes out of co-design when it's in person, and it's showing that it's happening in this virtual space. So this is kind of that weird world that academics sometimes are in, which, you know, might seem like it's going to help with your projects right now, but it's certainly stuff that hopefully when technology is more accessible, we can kind of explore whole new areas. But even working with high school kids, I'm looking at using this sort of technology to increase their digital literacy, which can change the direction of their career aspirations as a way to co-design. And just finally, one example, I guess, of a project. So this is with CHQ, Children's Health Queensland. I worked with Jess on this one again, as well as Nicola Callard and Belinda Taylor and a whole group of people from CHQ. What was really interesting when we did this, because of the challenges of doing co-design in the health sector and all the pressures on people, when we asked people what sort of learning they wanted for co-design or support to create co-design projects, which is what we were commissioned to work on, everyone said, I just want AI. I just want it to spit out a project. So we took that idea and actually looked at the data of what co-design was for the organisation, where the opportunities were, what sort of learning was needed, and we created essentially a more curated system than AI, which can be a bit, kind of Wild West when you kind of put things in the ChatGPT. But essentially what we were doing, we created a framework to create cohesive co-design across the organisation, but we also made a thing called the co-design compass. So with the co-design compass, it actually has people identify areas of co-design, like are we doing a communication project? Are we doing a service improvement project? We looked at where the needs were, and we actually created, rather than people having to do all this reading, they actually learnt through micro-learning, and then they would just choose, what do I want to co-design? We gave definitions of different areas of co-design. What sort of people do I want to co-design with? And you're actually designing the project as you're learning. You're learning about co-design processes, you're learning about methods, and then you're selecting. And the idea is that you then create a project plan and you create a PDF document, which then supports your project. So this is a good example where we used a lot of tactile materials. It was very lo-fi, the actual interactions, but the outcome was this interface that was all about using technology for co-design itself. So you can kind of see that there. And that's been really great to sort of see that being used across different projects. And it's won some great awards too. Before I finish, I would just say I've talked a lot about technology, but the area that I'm most excited by is community-led co-design, and that is best practice. I've been working with some First Nations groups. I've been working with some Torres Strait, Marian and Torres Strait Islander groups, working with some teams in Taiwan. The idea is that the best thing is to get the other out of the room and have communities co-design together. So that's being, I think it's people first before methods, but I think it's worth exploring all those opportunities at the moment. And I'll probably run out of time for questions, but I'll let Nadja tell me what's allowed.
That's okay. If we do have any questions, just pop them to the chat. We'll move on to the next part of the webinar, but we can always come back or follow up with them after the session if we do have any questions. But thank you so much, Jeremy. That was an amazing presentation and really interesting to hear all about your co-design work. And we will stop recording now to move on to the end of year wrap up and survey results.